What is up, people? Van from the Vaniverse gaming channel here with another video on Conan Exiles. The other day I was reading through my comments and I saw a post about dungeons and what level you should be and in what order should you do them in Conan Exiles. I went out to go and find some information, and the information out there is either old or it's not up to date. So I decided to make a video that I felt was the correct order in doing the Conan Exiles dungeons. Now, this is up for interpretation, so if you feel that the order is off, by all means, please leave your comments below and tell me what you think the order should be. I decided to break it up into tiers and difficulty within that tier. So for example, I have 4 tiers of difficulty. In the first tier, I list out the Dregs, the Witch Queen, and the Barrow King. And then in the second tier, I go through them, and basically, it's in order from the easiest dungeon being the Dregs and the hardest dungeon being you're going to have to wait and find out. So hopefully this video is helpful. This is really up to interpretation because the difficulty can depend on how good you are. It can depend on what your stats are. It can depend on what thrall you bring. There's a lot in how this was put together. This is my opinion based on all of the time I've played the game. This is the order of difficulty that I feel, and so feel free to challenge this in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Without further ado, let's get started. The first tier of dungeons, or the easiest tier, is going to consist of 3 dungeons in my opinion. You're going to have the Dregs, the Witch Queen's Palace, and the Barrow King. The first dungeon is going to be the Dregs, which you see on the screen here. The Dregs you can enter at about level 25 depending on your gear and how good you are at the game. If you're not very good and you don't have very good gear, you might want to be a little bit higher. You could probably do it at level 20. It just depends. Now, this is one of the only dungeons where bringing a pet or a thrall is very helpful in getting to the boss, but then once you get to the boss, they are pretty much useless because they fall in the acid and they do absolutely no damage. If you have an archer thrall, you might have a better shot at it. The strategy I used is actually in a video I did on the Dregs. I've actually made 2, an old one and then an updated one. You can get those by clicking on the link in the top right hand corner. That's going to give you my playlist to all my dungeon guides. A couple tips with the Dregs is there are some skeletons in this dungeon that are actually very difficult. If you do not bring a pet, getting through them can be somewhat challenging. Other than that, the dungeon is pretty self-explanatory. There are a few paths you can go on to unlock some chests. The main reason you would do this is for I would say the abyssal meat. Obviously, there's some recipes here, but this is the first taste of dungeons in Conan Exiles, and so there was a puzzle in this one where you need to bring a bow and arrows, but if you watch my guide, you can see all that. The second dungeon in the first tier is going to be the Palace of the Witch Queen. This is not really a dungeon. Basically, you come into a room, there's 2 stone guardians, and then the boss. You kill the stone guardians one at a time, but if you are not fast enough, you can actually have to fight both stone guardians. And there's a chance that if you don't kill the last stone guardian fast enough, you might be fighting the stone guardian and the Witch Queen at the same time. This can be very problematic, but if you kill them quick enough and you bring a pet or a thrall with you, then there's no reason why you cannot do this dungeon at about level 30, maybe even a little bit sooner. It's pretty much a tank and spank once you take out the guards and then you're fighting the Witch Queen if you have a thrall or pet with you. If you don't and you're doing this solo, it will be significantly harder, so keep that in mind. In addition, when you're fighting the statues, there are these green beam traps that are shooting all around. They're very easy to dodge, but it just adds a little bit of difficulty to this encounter. The third and final dungeon in the first tier is going to be the Barrow King. It's a stretch to call this a dungeon. I probably should have included like the bone dragon, the undead dragon in the sinkhole, and also that silly queen in the passage between the jungle and the frozen north. Because basically it's just one guy, you kill him, you learn some recipes, and that's that. And truly it is a very easy fight if you have a companion, a thrall, or a pet who can just sit there and tank him. You can do this probably as early as you could the Witch Queen, maybe even earlier. It's just a matter of time and how much damage you're going to actually do to the guy. But if you have a decent thrall or companion, a pet, sucking up damage, then this guy should go down very easily. I may have even considered putting him in a different section here, but I did him at level 30. I think that's what my dungeon guide I was at, somewhere around there. And so that's just my suggestion on the weapons you need that do enough damage to kill him in a significant amount of time versus a slow amount of time. But this concludes the first tier of dungeons, the easiest dungeons that if you were going to do them in order, these would be the first 3. Now starting with the second tier of dungeons, the first one is going to be the Well of Skelos. This dungeon is surprisingly easy. The problem with it is its location. Being located in the volcano makes it a pain to get to. It also makes it a pain to survive in. You need to have a really good heat resistance, which really is the only thing that makes this dungeon difficult. The final fight, which you can see here, is very simply killing some ghosts until the guy spawns, and he pretty much just falls over dead. I've never had to fight him. I don't know if it's a glitch or if that's just what it's meant to be, but this is actually an extremely easy dungeon when it comes to fighting. It's just dealing with the heat. That is why I always suggest doing the Black Keep first and killing the King Scourge, because he is basically the armor that you see in the video currently is where you can craft it, is by getting the recipes from there, and it is extremely good against heat, and that's why I usually do the Black Keep before coming here. But just in a vacuum, this is probably the easiest dungeon of the second tier of dungeons that you're going to face, basically. There are a couple guys that are a little difficult, but the boss and the dungeon as a whole is the easiest in this tier. The second hardest dungeon in the tier 2 group is going to be the Temple of Frost. Now with the Well of Skelos, I recommend being level 60 because of the armor you're going to wear to go there for the heat resistance. But with this one, you can probably do it in the low 50s, 55. This one is similar to the Well of Skelos, where the most difficult part is dealing with the cold. Getting here and not getting frostbite is actually the hardest part about this. Killing the bosses in this is actually very easy. The combat is different now than what was in this video, but the biggest issue with this dungeon is the debuff caused by getting hit by an axe. You can see right here in that video, I got cold snap. This basically changes your temperature. So if you don't bring along some spicy foods and keep it from getting to where you're freezing and getting frostbite, this dungeon can be very challenging. There is a spot at the blacksmith where there are some frost giants that are all kind of stacked up on each other, and you have a very small space to fight them. And if you back up too far, you're entering an area where you're pretty much going to get frostbite. That can be a challenge. But again, if you bring a thrall or you bring a pet, a good companion, then this dungeon should not be a problem if you are prepared for the cold. If you're not prepared for the cold and you get cold snapped, it could spell death for you pretty darn quickly. The third dungeon in the second tier is going to be the Black Keep. This dungeon is very difficult since the changes to undead not being able to be poisoned or bled. The final boss hits like a truck. He has some pretty crazy moves, and even if you have a thrall or a companion, he can be difficult. Now granted, the thrall you have and how he's equipped, you're going to have a good chance of killing most stuff in these dungeons and in this game, because a really strong thrall can pretty much beat the game and you can just sit back. But if you don't have a strong thrall, there's a good chance he may die fighting the last boss. In addition, all of the creatures in this dungeon hit harder. They add corruption on some of them. So I would just suggest that you come prepared, be level 60, and be ready for a pretty tough fight once you even get past trying to figure out your way through the dungeon. Moving on to the third tier of difficulty, we have the Midnight Grove. The Midnight Grove is a very difficult dungeon just due to the sheer size of it, the amount of bosses you have to fight, fighting multiple creatures and packs at the same time. Even with a really strong thrall, this can be a pretty tough dungeon. It was the first time they designed a dungeon to be more group oriented, and it shows when you try and fight through this by yourself. The last boss in this, who you can see me fighting, can be a real challenge by yourself, but with a thrall, he's pretty easy. All in all, be level 60, come well prepared with supplies, and you should be able to get through this one. The second and last dungeon in the third tier of difficulty is going to be the Sunken Temple. This dungeon is extremely hard because it has rule sets and combat that you haven't fought in a lot of the other dungeons. A lot of the creatures in here, they do bleeds, so having the way to cure bleed is very important. You also have to deal with breath and getting from place to place, and right when you enter this dungeon, one of the first mini-bosses hits really hard, and he's with two other guys. This was a very, very challenging dungeon from start to finish, and there's even a boss in it where he's like a brick shithouse. Seriously, you can hit him and hit him and hit him. He takes forever to kill. And this was all before the combat was changed. So if you're coming into this dungeon, be level 60. Come prepared to be able to remove bleeds. Come prepared to be able to put some water breathing on, and just bring a really strong thrall to help you through this. Lots of heals, lots of stuff. This is an extremely tough fight. Even at level 60 by yourself, I just think this is a very challenging fight, especially the last boss who dual wields daggers, and she can really stack some bleeds if you don't have the right equipment to fight this gal. Okay, moving on to the fourth and final tier. The first dungeon is going to be the Wine Cellar. This is the most recent dungeon added to the game, and this was really, I feel, designed for group content because it's extremely difficult. There are a lot of creatures you are fighting, and the bosses can be very hard. Some of the gimmicks of this dungeon are actually trying to avoid some of the creatures in here. There are even certain monsters in here that if you do fight them, they actually raise the dead and bring armies to fight for them. This one I had a lot of trouble with, even with a pretty strong thrall with me. And being level 60 and being well geared and having a strong thrall is going to be the way to get through this one. I really feel like this is probably the best dungeon in the game when it comes to just the thought they put into it, how difficult it is, the rewards you get from it, and that's why it's second to the hardest on this list. And finally, the most difficult dungeon in Conan Exiles is going to be the Warmaker Sanctuary. You can tell that this dungeon was meant for a large party of people. The bosses in this dungeon are many, and they're very difficult to kill. I beat this dungeon by going a bow build with a really strong thrall to try and take on the boss's aggro, and then killing everything with a bow, and then using my bow to heal the thrall. That was the way I got through it. I tried to do this dungeon solo melee, and I had a really, really hard time with it. So if you're planning on coming here by yourself, make sure that you're level 60 and you have a lot of really good gear, especially if you're going to melee build. Again, having a thrall to suck up all the damage and the way that the thrall leveling system works now is very helpful, but this is definitely by far the hardest dungeon in the game.